While on her way to work, she took an alternative route. At first, I wasn't surprised. The traffic could be worse, perhaps there would be an accident on the main avenue. But something about the way she drove, the way her eyes avoided the rearview mirror, the tight grip on the steering wheel, the tension in her shoulders, made my chest tighten. Something was wrong. I decided to follow. The route was strange. She wasn't going home. The path made no sense. Every block that passed, every traffic light that closed, I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a surprise, maybe it was a friend, maybe. But the excuses dissolved in the reality that burned before me. I knew her. He knew it too well. And there, at that moment, I already knew. I just didn't want to accept it. When she parked in front of an unfamiliar apartment building, my heart beat so hard it seemed to pierce my chest. What was she doing there? Who lived there? I waited, I watched. She didn't hesitate. He got out of the car, adjusted his hair in the reflection of the window and followed with quick, determined steps. As if he had already done it before. As if that path was already part of your routine. The doorman greeted her. No questions. No identification. As if I already knew her. As if she already belonged there. The elevator door opened, and she entered. Time dragged on. I waited. The clock ticked forward, the minutes felt like hours. And then, confirmation came. He appeared on the balcony of the apartment on the 5th floor. A man. A stranger. He held a glass of wine. Smiled. And soon after, she appeared beside him. The smile that she had denied me for months, the sparkle in her eyes that I no longer saw, were there, for someone else. His hand slid around her waist. My entire body froze. My vision became blurred. There, at that very moment, everything I knew as truth was reduced to dust. The pain was instantaneous, excruciating, like a treacherous blow to the middle of the chest. The last few months have passed before my eyes. Her tiredness, her excuses, her late nights spent on her cell phone, her long showers. The cold conversations. The empty promises. The absent kisses. Everything now made sense. A puzzle that fell into place too late. My fingers were shaking. My chest burned. The betrayal burned like fire, but something inside me refused to be consumed by it. It wouldn't be like the others. I wouldn't kneel before the lie. If she wanted to play that game, then I would dictate the rules. I didn't make a fuss. I didn't scream. I didn't face anyone. I just watched. I recorded every detail. I recorded in my memory every movement she made, every touch, every look of desire she gave to another man. And then, I left. But not home. Home, she would return and find a different man. A man who would not forgive. A man who wouldn't beg. Divorce would not be a simple goodbye. It would be a spectacle. A lesson. A turn of events she would never forget. But fate, fate is a cruel and ingenious master. When everything seemed to be in my hands, when I thought I was in control of my revenge, life surprised me. Because sometimes, it is in the pain of betrayal that we find the true path to happiness. I found mine. But she found something that not even her worst nightmares could have predicted. The end of this story? Well, let's say that even today, when she looks back, she realizes that the biggest betrayal wasn't the one she committed. It was what life had in store for her. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is never romanticized. We do not support, we do not encourage, we do not justify. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they reflect the harsh reality of how betrayal can destroy lives, relationships, and even those who commit it. Each narrative brings an impact, a lesson, and an uncomfortable truth. Get ready. The story you are about to hear is intense, shocking and full of twists and turns. Take a deep breath, because now, it all begins. The sound of cars cutting through the streets, the vibration of cell phones announcing incessant notifications and the artificial lights that flashed on top of buildings made up the background of the daily routine. Daniel and Laura, a couple who for years shared a life built on patience, sacrifices and memories that seemed eternal. They met when they were still young, full of dreams and convictions that love would be enough to sustain everything. Daniel, a man with a steady gaze and enviable determination, had always been the type of person who believed in the power of loyalty. For him, trust was the foundation of any relationship, and Laura, with her charming smile and an aura that lit up any room, seemed to share the same principle. The first years were marked by complicity, by the almost instinctive connection that allowed one to know what the other was thinking without having to say anything. They built a house together, shared goals, shared responsibilities and faced challenges side by side. The routine was tough, but there was always room for small displays of affection, notes left on the table before the other woke up, quick calls in the middle of the day just to hear each other's voices, hands that met under the dinner table even when words failed. Everything seemed perfect to outsiders, but within the relationship, nuances formed like cracks in a previously solid wall. Daniel spent more and more time at work. A management position required constant attention and dedication that often went beyond business hours. He justified his absence with the need to guarantee a comfortable future for both of them, an argument that Laura understood, but which, over time, began to wear on her patience. Not that she didn't value his efforts, but she missed the Daniel from before, the man who didn't hesitate to drop everything to spend more time with her, who improvised candlelit dinners in the middle of the week just to break the monotony. She never verbalized this frustration, but his absence was an empty space that silently expanded within her. Laura, on the other hand, has also changed. Before so vibrant and spontaneous, she began to lose herself in her own insecurities. She felt alone at home, spending her days between work and the hours she waited for Daniel to return. Little by little, the smiles became less frequent, the conversations were reduced to practical matters and the nights shared in bed were reduced to mutual tiredness. She tried to hide it, compensated with new hobbies, immersed herself in books, filled the gaps with music. But there was something there, something he couldn't name, a nagging feeling that time was taking something precious away. Friends noticed that Laura was different. They commented on how she seemed distracted, distant, and how, sometimes, her expression would completely disappear when she thought no one was looking. Daniel noticed it too. At first, I tried to get her back, organized little surprises, planned trips. But she, for some reason that she didn't even understand, began to dodge these attempts, as if something inside her was preventing her from reacting enthusiastically. The relationship, although still standing, no longer had the unshakable solidity it once had. Daniel understood this and tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a phase, a moment of natural wear and tear. No couple keeps the initial spark forever. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. He tried to ignore it, he diverted his attention with work, convincing himself that everything would be sorted out with time. Time, however, has no mercy. He passes by, merciless, and takes with him everything that is not strong enough to resist. The days followed a predictable rhythm, a routine where the silences became increasingly heavy. Daniel arrived late, exhausted, and found Laura already in bed, sometimes asleep, other times pretending to be. The words exchanged were limited to practical questions: how was work, do you need anything from the market? Small gestures of affection became rare, replaced by a feeling of invisible distance that grew between the two like an abyss. Laura, who had previously waited anxiously for the sound of the key turning in the door, now just looked at the clock and turned her attention to something else. Daniel, who previously looked forward to his wife's hug upon arrival, began to enter the house without expecting any warm welcome. He could tell something was wrong, but he tried to convince himself it was a passing phase. Maybe they were just tired, maybe they needed some time together, maybe just the weight of the routine was cooling things down. But there was something more. Small details began to emerge, subtle gestures that would have seemed insignificant before, but now accumulated in a disturbing way. Laura started to smile more on her cell phone, quickly hanging up whenever he entered the room. Her schedule became less predictable, some nights out to meet friends, an exaggerated care with her appearance, a different perfume that persisted even when she said she hadn't gone out. Daniel tried to ignore it, but the restlessness grew like an invisible tumor. One night, after a long day of work, Daniel came home to find the living room empty, the kitchen intact and a note on the table. "I had to leave, I'll be back later." No explanation, no details. He picked up the phone and called, but the call went straight to voicemail. He sent a message and waited, but the response never came. Time passed and the restlessness turned into something darker, something that burned inside. He knew Laura had her own things, her own spaces, but it didn't feel right. It wasn't normal. And it was at that moment that something inside him changed. The doubt he was trying to shake off turned into an uncontrollable need to know the truth. In the following days, he began to observe more closely. He noticed that Laura avoided eye contact when she spoke, that she changed the subject quickly when asked where she had been, that her cell phone was always facing down, that she never left it forgotten on the table. Something was happening. Something she didn't want him to know. Every day, the feeling that he was missing something grew, the intuition that the woman sleeping next to him was no longer the same, that there was a secret between them. And then came the defining moment. It was an ordinary night, any day. Daniel left work and, as he headed home, noticed that Laura was a few cars ahead of him. There was nothing unusual about it, but what happened next was what sparked all his suspicions. She didn't take the usual path. He diverted to an alternate route, one that made no sense at all if he was heading home. Daniel's heart started to beat faster. He decided to follow her. The route seemed premeditated, calculated. Laura drove confidently, without hesitation, as if the path was already familiar. Daniel kept his distance, controlling the anxiety that grew at every corner, every traffic light, every unexpected detour. And then, she stopped. He parked in front of a discreet but well-located residential building. Daniel stopped a little behind, watching. She got out of the car and, without looking around, crossed the entrance without needing to identify herself. The doorman just waved at her, as if he already knew who she was. As if I already knew her. Time seemed to slow down. Daniel's blood ran cold through his veins as he stood there, motionless, trying to process what his eyes were witnessing. This wasn't a casual meeting, it wasn't a visit to a friend. There was something planned in that action, something that was repeated. The feeling of betrayal began to creep through his chest before he even saw any confirmation. But then, the proof came. A balcony on the 5th floor. A glass door opened and a man appeared. Tall, confident, holding a glass of wine. He looked at the horizon, as if waiting for something. And then, a few seconds later, Laura appeared at his side. The smile she hadn't given Daniel for months was there, on display for someone else. The passionate look, the touch on the waist, the silent complicity. Everything was too clear, too open. A betrayal so evident that it burned, corroded, crushed any doubts Daniel might have had up until that moment. He felt the ground disappear. His head throbbed, his muscles tensed. Breathing seemed like an absurd effort. What was he doing now? Did you enter? Did you scream? Did you confront? But no, no. A different, crueler, colder instinct took hold of him. He didn't want Laura to know that he had found out. Not yet. Because this story was far from over. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of betrayal still throbbing in his chest. He wouldn't attack on impulse. I wouldn't waste the chance to turn the game around in the coldest and most calculated way possible. Since that night he saw Laura in the arms of another man, his every move has been planned, every word measured, every action guided by a single purpose, the final twist. He watched Laura act as if nothing was happening, as if her life was still intact, as if he was still that naive man who trusted blindly. She smiled at him in the morning, talked trivialities, continued to play the role of devoted wife, while in the moments when she believed she was alone, the truth revealed itself in almost imperceptible details. The way she checked her cell phone more often than usual, the smiles contained when faced with the messages she received, the long baths, the times that didn't coincide with what she said. Daniel did not confront. Instead, he began to meticulously construct his way out of that story. And more than that, he began to set the stage for the big moment in which he would turn the tables in an unforgettable way. In silence, he collected evidence, memorized patterns, analyzed schedules. It wouldn't be an impulsive scandal. It would be a surgical strike. When he was sure that Laura believed she was still safe, that she thought her lie was intact, he acted. That night, Laura arrived home and found everything different. The light in the room was low, soft music filled the room, and on the table, dinner was elegantly served. Surprised, she stopped for a moment, hesitating before entering. Daniel was there, sitting, with an enigmatic expression. He smiled. There was no anger in his eyes, there was no hatred she would have expected if he had known about the betrayal. There was something worse. A frightening tranquility. Laura approached, trying to act natural. She sat down at the table, picked up the glass of wine he poured. Daniel watched her in silence, as if enjoying the unfolding of a game whose ending he already knew. He made her comfortable, let her believe it was just an attempt to rekindle something between them. The tension was almost palpable, but Laura pretended not to notice. And then, when she least expected it, the first blow came. Daniel pulled an envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table. Laura frowned. Her hesitant fingers touched the paper, pulled the flap, and then she saw it. Photographs. Snapshots of betrayal, each image capturing the truth she thought would never be discovered. The blood drained from his face. The hands were shaking. Eyes widened in pure shock. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The weight of the silence between the two was deafening. Daniel waited. I wanted to see her squirm, I wanted to watch the exact split second in which she understood that everything was over. And then, he spoke. The voice was calm, controlled, without a single trace of hysteria. He asked her if she wanted to confess, if she preferred to make up a lie, if she thought he was stupid enough to swallow lame excuses. Laura stuttered. He tried to deny it. But the images were there, the truth laid open before her. There was no escape. She cried. She tried to touch his hand, but he pushed it away. He tried to say something about regret, about a momentary mistake. But Daniel laughed. Not a laugh of humor, but one of disbelief. Did she want to talk about regret now? After months of lying? After every kiss shared with another man while coming home and pretending to be a faithful wife? The irony of the situation was almost comical. But it was not yet the final moment. There was still the real blow to be struck. He stood up slowly, picked up a folder next to the table and threw it over the photos. Laura looked at it, confused. Opened. And in the next second, his breathing stopped. Documents. Legal papers. The divorce had already been filed. And more than that, detailed attachments showed that Daniel had already taken every possible precaution to leave that relationship without her taking anything. The house, the car, the possessions. Everything assured for him. She was floored. But then, the final blow. What she could never have predicted. The twist that would make everything worse. Daniel, with a slight smile on his lips, revealed the detail that would make Laura completely fall apart. He wasn't leaving just for revenge. He wasn't just leaving her with nothing. He was starting over. And not alone. In recent months, while Laura was sinking into her own betrayal, Daniel found someone. It wasn't planned. It wasn't on impulse. It was an unexpected reunion with someone from the past, someone who rekindled something in him that Laura had already killed. While she cheated on him with a man who used her as a disposable pastime, Daniel had found new love. A real, strong, reciprocal love. A love that already had plans. That I was ready to move on. Laura felt the world fall on top of her. Because, at that moment, he realized that he had lost everything. She lost her husband who she believed was a fool. He lost the stability he took for granted. Lost control of the narrative. She cheated, lied, and believed she would get away with it. But life, relentlessly, showed that betrayal has a price. And the price she would pay would be watching Daniel move forward, while she stayed behind, crumbling amid the shards of her own destruction. Laura remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the papers in front of her, her breathing shallow, as if the air around her had become too heavy to inhale. The truth hit her with brutal, relentless force, leaving no room for justification or escape. The divorce was already underway. Daniel not only discovered everything, not only unmasked her, but he had already planned his exit meticulously, carefully, leaving no gaps for her to contest or argue. What hurt most, however, was not the imminent separation. It wasn't losing the stability she took for granted. It was knowing that he had already moved on. That while she gave in to the fleeting desire of betrayal, he found something real, something true, something that now she could never recover. The silence between the two was almost unbearable. The sound of Laura's irregular breathing and the rapid beat of her heart seemed to echo in the room, filling the space where a shared life once existed. She tried to speak, tried to stammer out some explanation, but the words died in her throat before they could be formed. Despair was beginning to take shape, to spread through his body like an electric current of panic. She didn't expect that. Not like that. Perhaps he had imagined a confrontation, an argument, tears, requests for forgiveness. But I didn't expect Daniel to be so distant, so above that situation. I didn't expect him to be ready to leave everything behind. He watched her with the piercing serenity of someone who had already overcome pain. There was no longer a trace of the man she had met years ago, of the husband who loved her devotedly, who would do anything for her. That man no longer existed. He had died the night he saw her in the arms of another. The Daniel who now stood before her was someone different. Someone who had learned from pain. Someone who no longer allowed himself to be deceived or manipulated. He had become the inevitable consequence of his choices. Laura's mind spiraled, desperately searching for a way to reverse it, to find a place where she could hold on, a chance to convince him that there was still something between them. But the look in his eyes said it all. The decision was made. And there was no turning back. She tried to get closer, tried to hold his hand, but he backed away. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but loaded with meaning. He didn't want her anymore. The feeling of loss began to intensify within her, a growing anguish that made every second unbearable. The tears that were previously controlled now flowed freely down her face. The plea was present in his voice, trembling, full of fear. She wanted a second chance. She begged him to listen to her, to reconsider, so that he wouldn't throw away everything they had experienced. But Daniel just shook his head, no anger, no resentment, just an unshakable certainty. He got up, took the documents, adjusted his suit and started walking. The room felt cold and empty. Laura tried to call him, but her voice broke. His footsteps echoed across the wooden floor like a final sentence. When he reached the door, he stopped for a moment, without turning around. His voice sounded firm, but without any trace of emotion. "You made your choice. Now live with it." And then, he left. The door closed behind him with a dull sound, ending not just that conversation, but an entire story. The weight of those words crushed Laura, leaving her without strength, without ground, without a future. The crying became desperate, a sob that ripped from her throat as she slid across the couch, lost in the emptiness she had created for herself. Time passed cruelly. Daniel's absence became unbearable. The silence of the home they once shared was now a constant reminder of what she had lost. The lover, who seemed so exciting at first, soon turned out to be an illusion. Without the emotion of betrayal, without the risk, without the secrecy, everything lost its luster. He distanced himself. And then, he left. There was no love there. There never was. Reality fell on Laura like a crushing weight. She didn't just betray Daniel, she betrayed herself. And now, there was nothing left. Without her husband, without her lover, without the life she knew. He lost everything for a moment of desire, for a mistake that could not be undone. And the worst of all was knowing that Daniel wouldn't look back. He wouldn't come back. He wouldn't miss her. Outside, in another place, Daniel breathed a sigh of relief, feeling the freedom he hadn't experienced in a long time. The pain was still there, but it was getting more and more distant. The future, once clouded by betrayal, now seemed clear. And next to him, there was someone who, without him planning, brought back the shine that Laura had extinguished. Life went on. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready to live it. Time passed, but Laura couldn't keep up with it. The days dragged on, filled with a suffocating absence. The house, once alive with Daniel's small routine sounds, was now just an empty space where the silence became unbearable. She would wake up in the middle of the night, expecting to find the weight of his body beside her, but all that was left was a cold mattress and a feeling of regret that burned like a hot iron. She tried to move on, occupy her mind, find a new purpose, but nothing seemed to fill the hole she had dug for herself. The lover who once seemed to be a refuge was now just a distant memory, a mistake that quickly dissolved, leaving no trace. He didn't even try to keep in touch. Why would I keep it? For him, it was all a disposable pastime, a game that lost its appeal as soon as the betrayal was exposed. Laura couldn't say when the idea of looking for Daniel began to grow within her, but when she realized it, it was already inevitable. At first he hesitated. I felt ashamed, I felt scared. What would you say? What could I do to remedy the irremediable? But his absence was a punishment worse than any rejection she might face. She needed to see him. I needed a chance, whatever it was. When he finally found the courage, his heart was beating so hard that it felt like it wanted to tear his skin apart. My hands were sweaty, my lips were dry. She waited for him near the building where she knew he was temporarily living. She didn't know if she would be received, if he would ignore her, if he would even agree to look in her direction. But I couldn't continue without at least trying. When he appeared, crossing the street with firm steps, a mix of relief and terror came over her. He looked fine. It looked whole. There was no sadness in his eyes, no resentment. Just a biting tranquility, a clear sign that he had already moved on. Her chest tightened. That hurt more than anything else. Laura called his name, and he stopped. He turned slowly, watching her without expression. The silence between the two lasted longer than it should have. She felt her throat close, her breathing hitch. But then, finally, he managed to speak. I know I shouldn't be here. Daniel raised an eyebrow. His gaze was cold, distant. She hesitated, but continued. I just wanted to see you, I wanted to talk. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, clearly impatient. Talk about what, Laura? She felt her chest tighten even more. His tone of voice was not aggressive, but there was no room for emotions there either. He wasn't there to fight, to shout, to discuss what had already been resolved. That made everything even worse. I'm very sorry. I'm sorry for everything I did. Daniel laughed lightly, a short, dry, humorless laugh. Now do you feel it? She nodded, her voice cracking. I was wrong. I was selfish. I threw everything away. But, Daniel, I loved you. I still love it. He was silent for a moment. He watched her with an unreadable look before shaking his head, as if he were hearing something absurd. No, Laura. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of having me there, of having someone who took care of you, who was always there, who did whatever was necessary to keep this relationship going. But love is not what you made. Love is not thrown away on a whim, it is not destroyed by something temporary. You didn't love me. You just took me for granted. She felt her eyes burn. She tried to get closer, but he didn't move. Daniel, please, I would do anything to make this right. To prove to you that, he raised his hand, stopping her. To repair. To test. Laura, do you think this is a test? That if I say the right words, I'll just forget everything? You destroyed something that can never be rebuilt. And do you know the worst part? You don't regret what you did. You regret because you lost. If I were still there, if I were still that naive guy who believed your words, you wouldn't be here right now. You are here because you realized you have nothing left. But I have. I moved on. Laura's heart broke. She swallowed hard. It's her, isn't it? Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes. And if you came here thinking you could change that, I'm sorry. But your time is up. The words hit Laura like a sharp blade. She felt the world spin. He was really happy. With someone else. He had truly forgotten her. Daniel sighed, as if he was tired of this conversation. I don't hate you, Laura. And I don't wish you any harm. But I finally understood that love is not something you beg for. It needs to be true, reciprocal. I really loved you. But the man who loved you died the day I saw you with someone else. And what's left of me no longer belongs to you. The silence was the most brutal thing they had ever experienced. Laura felt tears slide down her face, but he didn't try to comfort her. There was no more space for that. Good luck, Laura. And then, he left. She watched him walk away, his every step a reminder that this was the last time they would be together. The last time your gaze would meet his. The last time she would have the chance to fix anything. When Daniel disappeared around the corner, she realized the most painful truth of all. The past could never be rewritten. And some choices, once made, are forever. Time passed mercilessly, advancing like an uncontrollable current. For Daniel, each day away from Laura was a confirmation that his decision was the right one. He rebuilt his life without looking back, without letting memories of betrayal stop him from moving forward. The relationship that was beginning to blossom with the woman he had found after the separation was not just a consolation, but rather a new chance to experience true love, without lies, without secrets. By her side, he rediscovered what it meant to trust, to feel wanted without needing to question, without needing to fear being replaced when the lights went out. Unlike Laura, this woman did not see him as the temporary emotional support, but as a man who deserved respect, admiration and loyalty. Over time, the connection between the two deepened, and Daniel realized he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He had not only survived the betrayal, but he had emerged from it stronger, more lucid, more prepared to experience the happiness he once believed he had lost forever. Laura, on the other hand, knew the true meaning of loneliness. Regret became an unbearable burden, a weight that I carried every day without being able to lift it. Every morning, when she woke up alone in the bed where she had previously slept next to Daniel, she felt his absence like a deep hole that could never be filled again. The months turned into an endless cycle of failed attempts to move forward, but nothing seemed to work. No matter where she looked, everything reminded her of what she had lost. The lover who once seemed so exciting to her was nothing more than a forgotten shadow, a mistake that should never have been made. He went on with his life without looking back, without even worrying about what happened to her after the truth came out. For him, Laura was just one more. For Daniel, she was everything. And now, she was nothing to either of them. The divorce was finalized quickly, without any resistance. Daniel emerged victorious, not just legally, but emotionally. Laura was left with little, almost nothing, because it was Daniel who built everything. He was the one who ensured that nothing he had achieved would be taken by those who didn't deserve it. She didn't contest, she didn't fight, because she knew she had no right to ask for more than what had already been granted to her. He accepted what was left, but was unable to reinvent himself. In her mind, everything she had lost continued to loom over her, reminding her that her choices had led her to the exact point where she now was. He tried new relationships, but no one seemed to want anything real with a woman marked by the weight of her own betrayal. Trust is a valuable currency, and she spent all she had the moment she gave herself to another man while the husband who loved her struggled to sustain the marriage she was unknowingly destroying. Fate, relentless, proved cruel to Laura. She started seeing Daniel from afar, in photos, on social media, in casual encounters where he didn't even notice her anymore. He was happy, fulfilled, building a new story that had nothing to do with the past he shared with her. The time that had once been her ally, that had once made her feel in control, was now her worst enemy. Every second that passed was a reminder that betrayal not only destroyed her marriage, but also the woman she was before she decided to cross that line. For Laura, there was no fresh start, just regret and longing for something that would never return. Daniel, in turn, no longer held a grudge, no longer felt hatred or desire for revenge. He simply followed. He understood that Laura's betrayal did not define his value, did not make him lesser, did not condemn him to a life of bitterness. He learned that true love cannot be begged, that broken trust can never be completely rebuilt, and that happiness is not in recovering what was lost, but in finding something even better along the way. And that's exactly what he did. When the day finally came that he got married again, he didn't think about Laura, he didn't think about the past, he didn't think about what was left behind. He just looked straight ahead, at the woman who now held his hand firmly, and knew without a shadow of a doubt that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Betrayal always destroys. Whether in the moment, in the future, or in the heart of the person who betrays or who has been betrayed. Daniel lost something important, but found something even greater. Laura, on the other hand, exchanged everything for a moment of illusion, and when she woke up, she discovered that there was nothing left. Because certain choices are definitive. And some doors, once closed, never open again. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Do you believe Laura got what she deserved? And Daniel, did you make the best decision? Leave your comment and share your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and remember, betrayal never leads to anything but destruction. Here, the truth always comes out. Until next time.